So, what are traps in traditional tabletop role-playing? How are they used well? What is their purpose? And how are they to be made fun for everyone involved? Especially those that need to go through them all the way through the dungeon. Welcome, friends and adventurers. I'm M, and welcome to the DM table. This is what we'll delve into today, discovering the true and ancient purpose of traps. Well, we won't go into those old things like how traps drain resources over time through the dungeon, maybe making the final encounter with the boss a bit more difficult, or maybe combining in combinations with other obstacles and enemies to create a better challenge. Those are all good uses, but those are not really the primary purpose that traps serve in role-playing, nor however good they are, those purposes are not the ultimate form of what makes traps fun, what makes traps engaging, what makes them worth talking about, thinking about, disarming, placing, and having all that fun with. For you see, traps are supposed to be like a dialogue between two artists. They're supposed to be an engaging field of a certain profession and then expanding other professions that also seek similar back and forth between each other. The original profession, or class rather, would be the rogue, but it's not like wizards don't have these dialogues of mind games. Far from it. And in many other cases, many other classes also can have these back and forth dialogues, and for good purpose too. One thing that players forming a party that loves good traps is that they can see that somebody is inviting them to a game, to a match. It's almost like arriving at a playground and knowing that you have who to play with right out there, just in a more dungeon delving sort of form, if you will. When adventurers who are used to this, who find this sort of entertainment, well, entertaining, as soon as they see nice traps, they understand that there was an opponent here that set them up with these wonderful toys to play with. How come? Why would they look forward to deadly obstacles? Well, think about it like this. If they want to prove themselves in a dungeon, they can do so through their class skills of, combat, archaeology and similar, and, the trap part of the whole thing. Think how traps are almost like a break from combat and other stuff. You can use your brain, you can use your eyes, you can go slowly, and you can work on disarming them. They're supposed to represent a skill check, a stage, a form of entertainment, and yet they're also supposed to represent a challenge, like a duel, because the one or multiples of them who are in charge of traps in the dungeon, they are supposed to play this game with the opponent that has once back in the day tried to predict them and place things that will lead them astray, damage them, take away their resources, prevent them from pursuing the delve further to the end of the dungeon. Now, traps are not only lethal or pesky, they are supposed to guide, in a twisted way, towards a conclusion that the trap maker wanted, and those who would be disarming them want to break their narrative in a elegant way where no too much resources are spent, no too much injuries are suffered, no time is lost, no racket is raised so that the guards and patrols can arrive, and so on and so forth. So, as you can see, traps are quite a bit of dialogue between the two sides, and they can be expansive and complex and interesting, and they can, go through the whole dungeon, allowing for one to lead into another, creating quite a long narrative, and providing so much scenery, so much lore. Think how adventurers will be discovering purposes of these traps, thoughts behind placing them, thoughts behind how the strategy was supposed to unfold, what was the host that was laying the traps expecting, who was he or she expecting, why. Were they expecting them? What is this with these traps that makes the dungeon what it is? Think of that one trap that's known on the internet from, what was it, a 3-4 panel comic that just says overthinking on a wall, and now the adventurers who are professionals at traps understand that this is like a breaking point, a yes or no question. It could be a trap, or it could be a trap that is sort of taking away their time because there's no further trap than just writing on the wall that is, making them overthink. And yet it's declaring itself so boldly, so they are trying to think into whether they should overthink or shouldn't they? Should they proceed or not? Should they rush or go steady? And these sort of questions engage and wake up the delving spirit of the more, I guess, I don't know whether it's more clever parts of your parties, more just devious ones, those that like puzzles, those that like mind games, those that like just games of back and forth between two sides, seeing who can outwit who. But it certainly attracts a broad range of personalities to feel like there's a game in front of them, that the game is afoot, that they can play around with the villain and see who can outwit who, and at that point they are having a marvelous time. And to make traps this interesting, we just need to do a few things with them and they'll be fine. First thing is, we shouldn't expect just a rogue to be taking care of them, because all kinds of people made all kinds of traps, and rogues are not the only ones, albeit maybe the player that loves most this sort of thing is a rogue, but rogues are not the only ones that can enjoy this sort of thing. As I previously said, wizards can really enjoy mind games, and there's all that magic, and there's lots to be done with separating traps by classes or making traps complex, where there's a bit of magic, a bit of mechanics. An engineer can find his way into working out what it is, a mage can, a priest can, some lore about necromancy, some lore about psychology, maybe some psychic powers can help. All the classes can use their abilities to help disarm the trap. And traps by themselves should perhaps be frequenter than not a combos of kinds that require cooperation or multiple layers of, disarming and almost defoliating in thicker dungeons those traps of their thick layers. And, that's where your whole party can engage, because otherwise it would be boring for most of them to just look at the rogue do the thing. So this way, rogue can still do as much as rogue would and maybe give advice to everyone how they should act, what they should do about it, if that's the party dynamics, but all parties will find their own party dynamics after all. So maybe it will be the wizard that does most of the trap disarming if there's no rogue, and the wizard can figure out how to do it. Or maybe druid will, with help of animals and creatures and such, and there's lots of approaches. Remember that old one about walking on the ceilings all of the time to avoid most traps? Well, that's a bit, perhaps straightforward, at least for my taste, but, everybody has their ideas, and now everybody can contribute, and you can plan for that, and you can plan what kind of dungeons are your adventurers gonna be raiding. So once they go to raid them, they can have all kinds of fun with all of their skill and class abilities and powers and spells and everything. They can use everything, and this is outside of combat and sometimes inside of combat. So it's going to overlap very well. It's going to create all kinds of scenarios where they can have all kinds of in-party combination of their own, of what they know, what they suggest to each other, what skills they use, how to use them, and so on and so forth, and it'll be beautiful. Simply, I personally love traps for various reasons, and this is one of the better of them, but another reason is that if you make traps interactive, and this is really something that was frequently done in old school D&D and role-playing in general, it's easy to make traps interactive. Just give people several opportunities to interact with them. give opportunity to look for them, give opportunity to see the mechanism, but not necessarily the explanation if a roll is failed, but maybe people will think of something. Maybe they'll have a good idea on how to jam the trap sort of inexpertly, and so on. Then give the opportunity to fiddle with it. Now, of course, a success might solve all of this early, but that's the idea. If it's a success, it can solve it early with a good explanation. If it's a failure, it can lead to further play. And if it's a several stage trap, as I suggested, then you need perhaps several successes. And why not? It's not gonna be boring because, after all, traps, as any good challenge, should be resolved in multiple rolls and multiple actions, multiple ideas and multiple activities. Exactly the way combat would or social would. So once you have these opportunities, let people play with them. So several ideas and roles deep, people might have solved the trap or they might have triggered it. Now that they have triggered it, there might be a situation where you don't immediately say save or die or whatever, but people are falling into a hole. You can ask them immediately. After all, this is a instant by instant play. If you want it, and you would frequently want it in good situations, you can ask your players, all right, so you're gonna fall into the pit if some of you don't do something. What are you gonna do? You're there above the open trapdoor and there's a hole beneath, and gravity will take its course in a moment, but what to do now? And your party might think of something. They might be dexterous enough to try to, fall towards a ledge and grab it, and for those dexterous ones, you can have a roll. Some other people might try to cast a spell whilst falling. Maybe at a disadvantage, maybe not, but they can cast a spell and save themselves and others. Maybe somebody says, I dive into my backpack for a grappling hook. Then you can ask them how accessible is their grappling hook in their backpack. But if all things align, they can probably toss it and maybe even catch a ledge with the grappling hook in time. And again, save themselves from meeting the spikes or something in the bottom. So several stages of interactive traps. And even if they fall, check the injured, heal who you can, take everybody out, do the rescue work. That's also fun. Trap can be a sort of mini dungeon in its own right, in a way. A survival experience. So there's those rolls and spells to be expanded there, at the bottom. And once out, repeat as necessary. And, the third thing we need to do for traps to be fun, make them very original. Where people go, damn, I wouldn't have remembered this sort of thing, but now that I think about it, it's also logical, and I'll think about this in future when dealing with this trap creator, and in their own mind, they'll think, and when dealing with any other trap creator ever again, because I don't want to be fooled again. And people will get better as they level up in trap disarming, trap avoiding, and trap recognizing, because they're learning some really fun stuff. And so that's all we need for traps to be really good. That's their purpose. Their purpose is to lure into false sense of security, as people who play such custom-made dungeon levels on YouTube that I watched say about their viewers' traps. Yes, there's many games that provide this sort of experience, so you can look up where people play sort of what people call troll levels and such things. And you'll see some really amazing stuff. But of course, I guess fourth thing, I didn't expect a fourth thing, but now that I think about it, it's the most important thing, tabletop especially. Those traps need to be, in a way, fair. Now, when I say fair, I don't mean somebody goes and makes it fair for them. I mean, players should be able to see, players should be able to interact, players should be able to discover, players should be able to do something about it. Otherwise, you're failing to, DM them into the appropriately interesting dungeon for them if it can sort of just disintegrate them on the spot and leave them disintegrated. So you want your traps to be accessible, tested, proven. You should think of a few solutions yourself. with your party's powers in mind, and then allow for all other solutions. If it's brute force, it's brute force. Everybody will do what they like, and if they do it sufficiently well, you should allow it as a solution. And then people won't get stranded, people won't get dead, and people won't get bored with your, as they call it, level design, and traps will be fun. So those are what we need for these traps, to be fun, to be brilliant, to be wonderful. And as I was saying, their natural purpose, even in any really real dungeon, even wherever you can find it, is to lull into a false sense of security and try to win over by the end. The defenders that made the trap, they want the attackers to believe that they will succeed or to not know that they will fail. Most traps are hidden until they reveal themselves, and then they strike. But traps that have revealed the presence of traps, they sort of leave to the creator of those traps a job to further in, down the tunnels, further on, make a different sort of narrative. It's no longer as much of a surprise, but now it's sort of like a gamble, inviting the enemy to step a bit further if they dare, because ideally they want people to go into the trap, not into the wall, because wall is something that people want to leave defensive-wise intact. So therefore, sometimes defenders want to make traps that lure further in, that don't leave people enough room to imagine why they would be avoiding them in the first place, instead of beating them, barging through them, ignoring them, rushing along, being distracted, and so on and so forth. I'll explain all this in more detail later, because there is something about walls and traps that needs to be said further when one chooses one and not the other, but that's an entire philosophy in nature to be discussed, so we'll get back to that in a different part. But at this point, I hope you know why traps are so beautiful, why they're so interesting. And yes, beautiful and interesting as set pieces. As I said, they say so much about the lore of the place, they explain so much, they show intent, they show the mind of the creator, and they explain so well what trickery the person intended, how they thought about it, and therefore personality comes to the surface. And there's also all those set pieces about how the traps were built, with which materials. For example, as a DM, I love going into detail how cheap it was to make a trap, how expensive it would have been otherwise, but how you can optimize a trap so that you can make more, how you can make inexpensive traps, or how you can make perfected traps when you need to splurge. That's something that then I love to see what players think when they discover these clues and situations. And so on and so forth. Even just the materials speak volumes, as you can see. Whether something is wooden, made out of mud, iron-tipped, steel-tipped, it really all tells a story about the dungeon, and don't we all love to delve into that story and that dungeon? So therefore I suggest using traps as they were traditionally used and enjoyed, so that people can have good experiences with them. As I heard many of people just complaining about traps not being utilized properly on the internet, so have it your table, have it well, and well, enjoy. And adventure, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a click and I could see you here next and every week. I'll be having my series of 5 traps here and there, so that you can get some nice interesting traps of uniqueness. Did I say how much unique traps help them being fun? Yeah, I did say so, yes. Well, you'll have some nice traps to browse through here. Till next time, bye.